got it.
Oh, okay, you want to hear?
Am I going to be in your way? I'm sure.
Did she tell you that's going?
Yes, I did. Well, it's about a minute or so after 4, so we might as well get started here. Two most important things you can take away from our time together here are that I'm Matt Castelli and I'm running for Congress. If there's nothing else to retain, that's pretty much it. And I'm so excited to be here in Lewis County for, I think this is our 10th town hall, 11th town hall. We're doing a town hall in every single county of New York 21, which after redistricting has now expanded from 12 to 15 counties. It's a big district, one of the largest in the nation, and we've been getting out and about, put about 55,000 miles on my truck so far. And we think it's important to show up and to be in the community, to hear from folks, to address the concerns that are top of mind, to be able to make sure that we're hearing the issues that matter most to them and give them an opportunity to share some of their hopes, the challenges that they're facing. What we're going to do here today is I'll probably start off by introducing myself, who I am, why I'm running for Congress. We'll open up the floor and we'll talk about things. And then at the very end, we'll save about 10 minutes or so. So if you don't feel comfortable raising your hand and want to talk about an issue in front of everybody else, we can meet one-on-one and you can raise it in private. One thing that I'll ask you to keep in mind throughout our time today is that I'm not currently, not yet, a member of Congress. And so as we talk about things, I won't have pieces of legislation that I'm working on or have gotten passed to be able to point you to. But what we can talk about are some of my thoughts based upon the issues of concern or the things that are top of mind for you. And if I don't have an answer or some input on it, I'll acknowledge that and I'll go work on providing an answer for that. But let me start off by saying I'm Matt Castelli, running for Congress. I was born and raised down in the Hudson Valley, so a little bit further south in the district. And I was raised in a bipartisan household. Dad's the Democrat, Mom's the Republican. And so it may not be much of a surprise that I was an independent for much of my life. Certainly throughout my career of service. Now, I went to college in upstate at Siena, and 21 years ago, when I was in college, 9/11 happened, and that became a driving force for my career. I went and I joined the CIA, and I led teams hunting down some of the world's most dangerous terrorists. I worked in the same department that found Osama bin Laden. I served in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, and had enough success doing all of that I was tapped by the Obama White House to come down and serve as the Director for Counterterrorism at the National Security Council. A role I was asked by the Trump administration to stay on it, and I did, for the first year of the Trump White House. Because if I learned anything throughout my career of public service, it's that when it comes to protecting this nation, our communities, my family, yours, it requires us to put country before party, and my belief in that has never wavered. Now, I went back to CIA, did some work with some cutting-edge technology startups, got a business degree, but then COVID hit. Now, where I was born and raised in the Hudson Valley, it's not too far away from West Point. And my grandfather was an Army doctor at West Point, got out of the Army, remained a physician, and he raised a family of nurses. Almost everyone in my family is a nurse. With the exception of my mother, she served in a different way, she became a teacher. But my grandpa instilled within each of us a sense of duty, a duty to care. And so when COVID hit, we got to a point pretty quickly in the pandemic where we were having a 9/11 every single day in this country in terms of deaths. It was the most compelling challenge of our time. So I left government and I joined a healthcare firm right here in New York, started by veterans, to better coordinate care for veterans, rural communities, by connecting health and social care together. A real focus on our human and social service providers, because that's where health and well-being happens. I was building out coordinated care networks throughout the Northeast, loved what I was doing, and then January 6th happened. Now, you might imagine a former counterterrorism guy like myself who spent a career trying to prevent things like that from happening in foreign capitals. To see it happen in our own did not sit well with me. But what really didn't sit well with me was the input, and response, and actions from Congresswoman Elise Stefanik around that day. I think she turned her back on our democracy. I think she sold out our democracy. She sold out our country, and she violated her oath to the Constitution. The same oath I took when I joined the CIA many years ago. And so not long after that, we decided to launch this campaign. But as we've been traveling all throughout the district, I've heard from a lot of folks as well who are concerned that January 6th was not an isolated incident when it comes to Congresswoman Stefanik having sold out our nation, because she sold us out a long time ago. In each one of her actions, she's really focused on advancing her own career at the expense of making the investments necessary in our district and in certain demographics. And we'll talk a little bit about that, I'm sure, throughout the course of today. And what I hear from folks is that they're tired of the extremes. They're tired of the loudest voices in the room pitting us against one another, and they want us to come back together and just start solving some problems. They want a moderator, someone who can bring us together and focus on the issues that are top of mind. And what I've heard from folks as we travel around, it's all about fighting to reduce the costs for working families and seniors and making sure we've got a strong economy that works for everyone. It's about fighting to defend our freedom. Certainly, a woman's right to control her own body and make her own healthcare decisions, and the Second Amendment. And it's about fighting to ensure the safety and security of everyone. And yes, that's around supporting and funding our law enforcement and securing our border, but it's also about defending our democracy and making sure our veterans and our service members have the resources and care that they need to accomplish the mission. So those are some of the things we're focused on in this campaign. And we're excited to be building a coalition, not just of Democrats, but independents and Republicans who do want to see us come together and focus on the issues that matter most to all of us. I'm going to pause there, and we can open up the floor. So feel free to raise your hand and identify a concern or ask a question.
I'm very happy to learn that we'll be doing investment in the Clay area for $40 billion, and I would like to know what ideas you have about extending that prosperity from central New York to the North Country.
Yeah, it's a great example. If folks aren't following, there was a major announcement made just last week of a tremendous number of dollars. I think it's going to bring 50,000 jobs to Clay, not too far away in central New York. And we want to make sure that those kinds of investments for manufacturing are making their way into our district. The president, I noted, also came down to upstate New York in the Poughkeepsie area. IBM is going to be making some significant investments of billions of dollars around chip manufacturing. And this is an important opportunity here in our district and in the state of New York and in our country to address a number of things. Maybe folks have heard in recent months this bill that was passed called the CHIPS Act. And this is why this is important. Many of you have probably a cell phone here, or you've got a car outside. Almost every single device that we now have in our lives, maybe even your refrigerator at home, requires this microchip, a semiconductor. And most of those are manufactured overseas. They're manufactured in Asia and China. And when the pandemic hit, our supply chains broke because we were relying on those supplies coming. And so there was a whole issue of new vehicles stranded on manufacturing lines because they couldn't get out. And so you saw prices go up. And so for a lot of our goods, the prices went up because we couldn't get the chips inside. This is a question, too, of our national security. We want chips made here for the things that our military are utilizing, but they're not made in China. And it's an opportunity for us to bring good-paying jobs to places like upstate New York and invest and grow our economy so that those supply chains begin and end at home. So there was a CHIPS Act that was passed to create an opportunity for those kinds of investments to be made. And what we saw with that major announcement in Clay, as well as down at IBM, is an opportunity and a benefit from that act that was passed. Unfortunately, Congresswoman Stefanik voted against that bill. And I would argue she hasn't been advocating for those kinds of investments to be made in our community. I'd love to see 50,000 jobs come to our community. We certainly have a proud tradition and experience of manufacturing jobs that have been shipped overseas and gone away. And we can build upon that here if only we had a member of Congress who is willing to advocate for those kinds of investments in our community. Unfortunately, Congresswoman Stefanik's going in the opposite direction. She wants us to slash federal spending. She wants to cut the jobs that we already have here, not grow new ones. And so that's the kind of thing that we'd seek to change as a member of Congress, to make sure that those kinds of investments, when they're made, they come to New York 21.
Hi, Matt. Thanks for coming. This has been a long-term issue. It goes all the way back to Darrell Luftin before Bowen's even came into my awareness. There's been a huge debate ongoing about a superhighway. They even call it the rooftop superhighway. And it would be an idea where we would take 81 and loop it around to the Lake Placid part of the district, so that people could get there in an hour or less, and not going up to Messina taking an hour and a half. Now, we all love our local towns and we all want to support those towns. But I don't think we have to be provincial or worried about that. I think those towns would even benefit from that. But I really believe that superhighway should be built, and I don't think Elise Stefanik can say a thing about it, but suppress the idea.
Yeah. Well, on issues like that, I always want to defer to our local communities to be the ultimate decision makers about where they're making investments for infrastructure. The role of the federal government is to make resources available for them to be able to make those kinds of investments. So whether that's fixing existing roads and bridges or building new ones to connect communities, those are tremendous opportunities for us to create pathways for our farmers to get goods to new locations and to access new markets, to grow our economy. And that's where infrastructure is a critical thing. And this is where I think everyone can agree, let's get government back to the business of doing the things that we all expect them to do, fixing our roads and bridges. Now we think about infrastructure in different terms as well. It's about broadband in many of our communities where we don't have access to that. But that's now a basic, it's 2022, it's a basic requirement for our education, for growing our economy. And so we want to make sure, at least from a federal perspective, we're making those resources available so that those kinds of investments, if the local governments on a county and township level decide it's important to be able to connect certain communities, that we have those resources available.
I know that corporations make that one of their #1 priorities. How is the transportation in and out?
Yeah.
And with our weather, I think we need that highway.
Yeah.
I just want you to know before I even say anything, I'm a lifetime Democrat of 45 years. My party left me, whether you believe it or not. We are the party now of inflation, open borders, crime surges, fentanyl coming across the borders. Nobody's doing anything about it within our party. We're also pro-defund the police. Even though some people want to deny that, it's true. We are also pro-late-term abortion. That's one of the biggest things. Everybody says that the right wants to ban abortions. That's not true. They want it to go to 15 weeks. But the left wants to make it late-term abortion. Also, gas prices, because of the war on fossil fuels, man-made by the Democrats. I think you're a decent person, I really do. But if you think about it, if we put another Democrat, say the Democrats keep the House and Senate, you're a minority within that party. That party will carry the weight of the country. How can you fight within your party to keep the values that the Democrats are the moderate values?
Yeah.
Because you're a minority in the party.
Yeah. And I think that that's part of the problem, that we don't have more moderates. Because the cycle and the system that we have right now keeps forcing people to the extremes. There was once a time that folks considered Elise Stefanik to be a moderate. And unfortunately, what we've seen is her go further and further to the far right. We've seen that certainly with other Democrats, certainly too. And I'm willing to call out as many people on the far right as I am on the far left. One of the issues you raised was around this concept of defunding the police.
That's something that they wanted to do.
Listen, I grew up around law enforcement my entire life. All of my best friends' dads were cops. I spent my first job in counterterrorism was an internship with the New York State Police Department at New York State Police headquarters in the Albany area. I certainly served with members of federal law enforcement throughout my entire career, sometimes in the front lines in places like Afghanistan and Iraq. And so no one's going to take from me this concept of wanting to make sure that we support and defend our law enforcement, give them the resources they need to protect and serve our communities. And I'm willing to call out, as I have multiple times, anyone who would promote the concept or even the actual policies of defunding the police as both absurd and dangerous. And I think we need people who are a part of a party to be willing to call out members of their own party when they think that they're wrong. Unfortunately, we have these purity tests that oftentimes our primary process creates a scenario where you force people to the extremes. And you're ostracized potentially by your party if you're not willing to buck the trend. We need to support moderates on both sides of the aisle, both Republicans and Democrats, because that's the only space we're going to get any common sense done. I don't know where compromise became a dirty word in this nation, but the way we run our businesses, the way we run our households, people have different perspectives. And you come together, you identify a problem, and you produce a solution to it. It's not my way or the highway. And where can we actually come together to start solving some problems on any number of issues that you just enumerated? You know, where do we do that? We do it in the middle. And that's one of the things we're trying to do in this race, is to raise a voice for the great middle majority. Because whether you're center right, center left, smack dab in the center, the majority of us are actually in the middle. We're not on the extremes. And if we elevate a voice, certainly in this race against a very strong incumbent and a senior leader within the Republican Party, we're going to show the world how important it is to elevate the voices of moderates to actually start solving some problems. Many of the things you just listed in terms of inflation, border security, the challenges around gas prices. These are all compelling challenges that don't care what party you're part of. These are things that we want solutions to. And my concern is that the extremes aren't actually interested in solving problems. They're interested in drawing attention to those problems to seek their own re-election. And we need folks who are actually, and it's incumbent upon us as voters, to make sure that we are voting for people based upon their record of results, based upon their ability to work with others to actually solve problems, not just draw attention to them. Because my concern, and one that I think is elevated by a number of others, so long as we're fighting with one another, we're never going to be in a position to fight for one another. And that's what we need to fix in this country.
But you understand the position you're in. Because of you being a Democrat in a minority, you think in the minority of the Democratic Party, within the party itself, of politicians in the House, that if they keep control, they actually are the reason for all the extreme things that have happened, as far as in my opinion. Like I say, I've been a Democrat for 45 years. Yeah. This is not the same party it was 45 or 50 years ago. Yeah. when I joined the party. Yeah. They have shifted so far to the radical left, catered to the socialists, catered to the radicals,
To keep them pleased, to keep that base, because they're worried about, they know if they lose that base, they're going to lose total control of everything. They already know that.
It sounds like something that I've heard from folks on the right.
Well, we're talking about the left right now.
I'm not to both sides here.
But you know, that's the trouble, is that every time we talk about something, you want to shift, people want to shift over to talk about Trump, they want to talk about Stefanik. Let's talk about what's going on within our party. That's my concern.
Absolutely. The sense that I hear from you, that I hear from many others, whether they're independents or Republicans like my mom, is this sense of political homelessness. That they don't feel like they have a home in what their party represents. Because right now, and I think former President Trump was right when he identified this problem in Washington, D.C. He talked about these self-interested politicians who were only interested in their own re-elections, beholden to corporate donors, and called them the swamp. Unfortunately, our current incumbent Congresswoman is, I think, the best example of the swamp that we do have. She's only interested in advancing her own career. Now, that's not a unique phenomenon. It cuts across both sides. I've been willing to call out Nancy Pelosi. I won't support her for another term as Speaker. And there are moderates on both sides of the aisle that I would seek to support. A good friend of mine who has provided support to this campaign and endorsing me is a moderate Democrat, former CIA officer as well, who's a representative down in Virginia, Abigail Spanberger. And one of the things she was pushing forward is an opportunity, I think, to restore some trust with the electorate and elected members of our legislature in particular, and by banning members of Congress from holding or trading stock. We shouldn't be sending these folks to Washington only to enrich themselves and using their office to do so. And Nancy Pelosi prevented that bill from moving forward. So I've called her out on that. And I think we need more folks who are willing to call them out. I think we have a proud tradition in this nation of honoring those who are willing to be mavericks, whether that's John McCain or Teddy Roosevelt. And oh, by the way, I just highlighted 2 Republicans that I like a lot. And those are folks that I think we need to see more examples. It's courage in leadership. Profiles in courage, to have that leadership, to be able to say, listen, I'm representing my community that I was elected to represent. I'm not representing the party's views. So when I talk about country before party and community before party, we need a lot more folks who are willing to represent that. We currently don't have that. And so the place that we can actually fix that right now is right here at home. We take that first step and we can keep moving forward.
If you end up being victorious this election, what is your first or top priority for people in the North Country?
Yeah, so the first thing that I want to do is, because it's a reflection of the real threat that we right now face. And it's the fact that after the Dobbs decision, the overturning of Roe v. Wade, millions of American women are currently under threat of having the ability to control their own bodies, the ability to actually make decisions for their own health care. And that's not just a threat to millions of American women. Right now, there's the prospect, and unfortunately, Congresswoman Stefanik has put forward this national abortion ban. She's co-sponsored it. She's the highest-ranking Republican on the House side that wants to put that forward. And so for me, it would be advancing legislation at the federal level to protect a woman's right to control her own body, to make her own healthcare decisions. That's an important thing for our nation and women here in the North Country. But the thing that we need to really focus on, I think, for our community, is to have somebody who's willing to make some common sense investments in our community. It requires, as we were just talking about, the investments in growing jobs and having those opportunities. It requires somebody who's willing to get in the mix of things and actually work with others to make sure that dollars are being delivered to our district to help grow our economy. Because as we talk with folks, particularly working families, struggling with the cost of rising daily life, the rising cost of daily life. And what we're talking about there, in many instances, it's a combination of things. People are having a hard time with childcare. They're having a hard time with elder care. They're having a hard time with affordable housing. Certainly having a hard time with healthcare and prescription drugs, groceries, gas prices. All of those things have different solutions, and there are opportunities to come to bear. Some of those things have long existed and been challenges for many folks well before Joe Biden became president or the pandemic struck. And we need somebody who's oriented to solving those kinds of problems. They may not be the sexiest things out there to say, this is a top hot button issue that's going to create divisions within our community and get you on Fox News, but making investments in childcare and in affordable housing in our community, those make a real difference in people's lives. And we need folks who are willing to do that.
What are some of the conservation issues having to do with global warming that are affecting our area? What are some of those things that you're interested in dealing with?
Boy, it's such a great question, because throughout much of our area, we have the entirety of the Adirondack Park. We have a tremendous amount of agricultural industry, and our climate and weather have a tremendous impact on our local economy. It's not, many people rightfully point out that climate change is an existential threat to our planet. Sometimes those issues are a little too big. Let's bring them back down to size. In our local community, we rely on tourism dollars in certain places. And so the quality and length of time of our snowpack in certain ski areas, that makes a big difference in our local economy. If adverse weather patterns come in, big storm that might wipe out a crop and devastate a small family farm, that has a profound impact. So what are we doing to help protect against the threat, but also seize upon the opportunity? Because there are tremendous opportunities to be had if we leverage our environment, our skills, to take advantage of this emerging green economy. Because listen, I'm willing to call out the far left as being absurd and dangerous when they want to say defund the police. Let's call out the far right when they want to promote, defunding clean air and clean water. Those are dangerous as well. We need to make sure we're making the kinds of investments that can help grow our economy, protect our economy, and there are tremendous opportunities to be had there. I'm proud, I think it was just announced today, to have the endorsement and support from the League of Conservation Voters, because this is an important, proud tradition. It's one that cuts across party lines too. Because guess what? Conservation is recreation. You like to hunt, you like to snowmobile. Conserving our environment, the conservation efforts for our environment are critical to being able to do the things that we love and enjoy doing.
One of the things that attracted business to the Clay area was their abundance of natural resources.
Yeah.
The water power, the solar power, the wind power. We have all that. And as you said, we don't have the fiber optic cable that would encourage more people who need to work from home or choose to work from home and relocate to more beautiful areas. We don't have that. We also don't have municipal power when we are supplying all this.
Yeah.
So do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, so here's the interesting dynamic I think at play. And this is, I think, an appropriate concern that if we're going to make these investments in windmills, and we're going to make investments in hydroelectric power, if we're going to make investments in solar farms, that we're not just sending those energy resources down to New York City. We should disproportionately benefit. If we're using our backyard to create the space, we should disproportionately benefit from those energy resources to bring down our energy costs. And I think that that's a tremendous opportunity that we have. There's more than enough of that to go around. We can provide energy probably for New York State, maybe even the Northeast with many of the opportunities we have here. But everyone else shouldn't benefit from the hard work that we're putting in. We should disproportionately benefit from that. But it's an opportunity to make sure that we have those resources available at the local level that we can count on, and that there's reliability there, resiliency there, so that we're not going to have challenges of significant outages as we have in certain communities, we want to make sure that we have those resources plugged in and consistently available.
Would you please give us some examples of pros and cons of issues where you would compare for Elise and for yourself?
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity to offer that. I didn't plant her. I didn't. Listen, I think at the very top level, unfortunately, and I don't say this with any kind of excitement or desire, what we see, a pattern of behavior of Congresswoman Stefanik selling us out, selling our nation out to advance her own career. It's not unique. It's something we see from many politicians. I'm someone who has always put my country and my community first, and I'll always do that. And that might be the starkest contrast right up front. But certainly, we've seen her vote against veterans' health benefits, this PACT Act, which provides health care benefits to those service members, largely those who served in Afghanistan and Iraq, who had prolonged exposure to toxic burn pits. It's my generation's Agent Orange. And this is a solution that we need to be able to provide to those veterans because they're suffering terrible cancers as a result from this. That bill came up and Stefanik voted against it. She sold out her veterans. She certainly sold out women by pushing forward this national ban on abortion and denying access to contraception. When it comes to our seniors, denying access to reduced costs for prescription drugs and capping the cost for prescription drugs. These are all things that I would support and make sure we're fighting for. But it's all about making those investments in our community. And so those are really the starkest contrasts I think we can make as someone who's actually going to go to Washington and I think call out members of their own party. I think we just had a little bit of a discussion. I hope folks understand and have confidence that I'm willing to call out whether it's President Biden, Speaker Pelosi, Governor Hochul. And I think we need more of that. And unfortunately, we haven't seen the same thing from Congresswoman Stefanik. She's been following along with other leaders of her party in order to, I think, boost her career. And I don't think we're well served as a result of that, nor do I think our nation is.
Farmers believe that Elise Stefanik is on their side.
Yeah.
Can you address that?
Sure. Well, listen, we have a proud tradition and a proud support for our agricultural industry here, and we need to be able to provide the kinds of support. But on like many issues, paying lip service and actually delivering real results are two separate things. One of the things we've drawn a lot of attention to recently on our website is this concept that we call the Stefanik scam, where Congresswoman Stefanik says one thing, like supporting veterans or supporting law enforcement or supporting our farmers, but down in Washington she's voting against their interests time and time again. And we've tried to reveal some of those examples. Now, our farmers right now, I think, need some help and federal support. And so from my perspective, one of the things that I want to do when I go to Washington is to fight to get on the Ag Committee, to make sure that we have a decision maker in Washington, D.C. on the important committee that can actually deliver some real results for our farmers. I've even seen Congresswoman Stefanik actually address some of the core challenges that many of our farmers are facing. When I talk with many of them, you hear a lot of the challenges around the rising costs that they're having to deal with. So the input side, whether that's feed, seed, fuel, rising costs across the board. And in all of those instances, you can point to monopolies being a key problem and a key challenge, where we've reduced the number of providers there that they control the price and the prices go up. Listen, I know there was a comment made about some Democrats embracing socialism, certainly Bernie Sanders and AOC. I'm a proud capitalist. But for capitalism to work, we need to have competition. Competition reduces prices for folks. And we need to bust up the monopolies. We used to have a proud tradition in this country dating back about 100 years or so, where we were monopoly busters. That's one of the reasons why I do like Teddy Roosevelt. And I think we need to get back into that. And I haven't heard anything from Congresswoman Stefanik about busting up the monopolies that are controlling the prices, that are putting a pinch on our farmers. Certainly on the other side of that as well. When a farmer wants to bring a product to market, they oftentimes only have one buyer. And that buyer is in a position to control the price. And the prices that they're paying are really low. The farmer has no option other than to sell them for that low price. Again, there's a monopoly on that side. We need to break those up in order to create competition so that we're paying a fair price, a high price, for a lot of those products, whether it's moving through the value chain for our dairy, or if it's livestock, that we create spaces for that to happen. We want to alleviate that pressure on both the input and the output, and that's by combating the monopolies. Congresswoman Stefanik, I think, goes around to certain fairs and shows up at a farm and says one thing, but in Washington, I don't know what record of results she actually has at the federal level for actually delivering results for our farmers.
What do you think about the election being stolen? I worked on the election board for over 20 years. I went to Connecticut for 3 years. I worked out there. They are so strict with the elections. I don't know how they even could, say those things they were saying.
Yeah.
And causing the trouble they caused.
Well, thank you for your work with our elections, because that's important service to our community, because our electoral process and our
I don't
democracy.
do it anymore. It's too long. Too long a day.
Well, thank you for your service in the past. It's important for us to do so. But let me just say very definitively, the 2020 election was not stolen. The 2020 election
They're
was
still fighting it.
correct. Correct, and that's part of the problem, and this is one of the reasons why I'm running against Congresswoman Stefanik, because she was a promoter.
Trump has got them all.
That's correct.
He's still out there campaigning. We go by many signs that says Trump.
Yeah. If we don't have full faith and confidence in our electoral process, we cease being a
I don't
democracy.
know how it could get stolen.
Well,
You know,
It
it's
certainly
so
was.
strict with us.
right, right. We have processes in place to prevent many of those things from happening. And those who are using for political benefit a concept and a lie that they promoted because they didn't like the results. In this nation, we have always honored the results of our elections, even if we didn't like them. We have a proud tradition of a peaceful transfer of power at the presidential level. And for the first time in our nation's history, there was an attempt to prevent that from happening. Congresswoman Stefanik helped and embraced the big lie, promoted it out there, certainly spread by others. I don't know how many folks here have been watching the January 6th committee hearings and the important revelations that have come from that to understand that there was a pretty wide-reaching criminal conspiracy to overthrow our government, to overturn the will of the people, to not honor the will of the people. And there will be, I believe, some accountability for that. I can't predict what's going to happen out of the Department of Justice, but there needs to be some accountability and transparency. But for those members of Congress in particular, one we have a control over, who used and promoted that big lie to advance her career, get close up to the, advancing her career. We all saw her, stab Liz Cheney in the back to take her position as the number 3 in House Republican leadership. Listen, January 6th was the worst assault against law enforcement in our nation's history. So please, here's another example. Don't tell me you back the blue if you're not, one, your lies led to the worst assault against law enforcement in our nation's history that led to the deaths of 5 police officers and injuries of over 140. But to not seek transparency and accountability for those officers and their families for that terrible attack against them, you don't back the blue if you're not willing to stand up in support of that. Unfortunately, Congresswoman Stefanik hasn't. Now, our way to hold her and others accountable is going to be at the ballot box in less than a month's time. And I think it's very important for us to do so, because we, again, cease being America. We cease being a nation. We cease being a democracy if we don't have that kind of accountability and transparency and prevent another January 6th from ever happening again. But it also comes down to this question of politicians who are willing to be honest with the American people about the results of an election, even if they don't like it. And unfortunately, we've seen this wave that's been pushing forward about trying to undermine our electoral integrity. And we need to put a stop to that. That's what I think when folks refer to an ongoing threat to our democracy, that's really where it is. That's one of the reasons why this election is one of the most important in our nation's history, is to put a stop to those who would undermine the electoral process and our faith and confidence in it.
She went to Florida and raised $3 million with Trump while somebody else voted her spot.
Correct. She did. She voted by proxy, which right now she and others are decrying. She's used it a number of times. She actually used it about 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, she voted by proxy to actually defund the government, to vote against an appropriations bill so she could fly somewhere else. And she certainly did it a number of months ago in order to have a fundraiser down at Mar-a-Lago, which turns out is an active crime scene. And she spent time down there. To fundraise at our expense, while not actually doing her job in Washington on our behalf. She had somebody else do it.
I've been a Republican since I was 21. I couldn't vote until I was 21. I had to take my birth certificate, everything, to vote. And I've always stayed Republican, but I just can't handle it no more.
No. You're not alone. and it cuts across party lines. It's not just
I'm gonna
about,
vote who I want in that, what's there.
I would advise most folks should vote for person over party.
Yeah.
I think when we start deciding one team versus the other, we're not actually going to get many things done.
No.
This is not the Red Sox versus the Yankees. There has to be a reduction of this perception of sport. Because as I mentioned earlier, so long as we're fighting with one another, we're never going to be in a position to fight for one another. When we have elections, we honor the results of them, and then we come together to start solving problems for the people we were elected to represent. And we, as voters, should be basing our vote, I would argue, based upon the results that those people offer to us. How good of a job are they at problem solving? Not how good of a Republican they are in fighting with the Democrats, not how good of a Democrat they are in fighting with Republicans. If we're basing our votes on that, I don't think we're well served. You're entitled to do that. That is your right as an American citizen. But I would advise that we would all be better off if we start looking at people's records.
Go Yankees.
In that battle with the Red Sox as well as in these playoffs.
Would you address the Second Amendment? I have very strong feelings about assault weapons being sold to an individual.
Yeah.
And, you know, people keep saying they defend the Second Amendment. I don't believe the Second Amendment was ever written to allow people to have assault rifles, you know, to protect their family and their property.
Yeah.
You know, they had a muzzle loader or a whatever, single shot something when that law was written.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just crazy. I think you can defend the Second Amendment without defending assault weapons. I think there should be a ban on assault weapons, and I feel very strongly about that. Can you talk a little bit about what your opinions are?
Happy to do so, and thank you for sharing your opinions on this matter. So I'm a gun owner myself, a strong supporter of the Second Amendment. I swore an oath to protect and defend the Constitution. Second Amendment's a key part of that. It's not going anywhere. Certainly not under my watch. Carried firearms in the line of duty in places like Afghanistan and Iraq. In many instances, actual assault weapons, fully automatic weapons. So familiar with what we're talking about and familiar with the circumstances and stakes that we all face. I believe in a right to bear arms and to defend oneself, not just their home, but their individual person. Certainly as determined by the Supreme Court in recent cases. I also believe that there's a big issue right now in this country with rising rates of gun violence. Gun violence is the #1 cause of death of our children in this nation right now. That's a real problem. And we need folks who are willing to come together to address that phenomenon and that problem. Now, in my view, I believe the best way to address it, those of us who are gun owners, those of us who support the Second Amendment, those who want to keep their kids and communities safe, let's come together with some common sense solutions, universal background checks, red flag opportunities where we're empowering our law enforcement to have the tools when someone has been identified as a threat to themselves or to others, that they're not in a position to have the weaponry to pose that direct threat to themselves or to others. These are the kinds of common sense solutions that our coalition can bring to bear and actually address the rates of rising gun violence. That's where I stand on many of these issues. But you asked specifically about an assault weapons ban. Let me tell you why I don't support an assault weapons ban. Because I don't think it achieves our objective in this moment. I think we need folks who are going to come together in that coalition to reduce the rates of gun violence. I think when people use the term assault weapons, different people hear different things. And when you start talking to folks who have a semi-automatic rifle and you think you're coming for their rifle, they start breaking apart from the coalition we need them to be a part of to reduce the rates of gun violence. And oh, by the way, most mass shootings are actually conducted with handguns. So I'm not sure it actually addresses the phenomenon and the problem that we need a coalition to bring to bear right now. And so when it comes to problem solving, I think that's where we need to be focused on. When we focus on particular weapon types, I think it gets to be confusing. I think folks break away from that coalition. I'm willing to call out the far left as being inappropriate in certain circumstances. There are some that advocate for abolishing the Second Amendment, banning all kinds of, no. But on the far right, we unfortunately have other folks like Congresswoman Stefanik, who is married to a member of the gun lobby and who seeks to promote and defend unfettered access for cop killers, kid killers, domestic abusers, terrorists to have unfettered access to whatever weapon they'd like. I think that there's a space, no surprise, in the middle for those of us to come together to actually solve the problem that we need to right now.
I have a concern too, though, about keeping our schools safe, you
Yeah.
know, pushing more and more money to protect our schools. What about Walmart? What about Tops Market in Buffalo? What about, you know, shoveling money into the problem isn't gonna solve the problem, I don't think. I mean, I want my schools to be safe and whatever, but there's gotta be some different solutions or regulations or something.
Yeah, I think it's also, I mean, to their credit, some folks, to include Congresswoman Stefanik, raised the concept of making investments in our communities around mental health. And that should be across the board, yes, in our schools, but in our community, having access from our law enforcement perspective so that when someone is identified as a threat or a problem to themselves or to others, that we can take some sort of action. That's where we call these things tripwires, that we put the pieces in place so that when someone trips that wire, we can then take action to protect our community. The unfortunate reality, however, is very recently, about 2 weeks ago, there was a bill put forward in Congress to make investments, those very same investments that people were talking about in the aftermath of Uvalde in mental health in our communities. Stefanik voted against it. And so those are the kinds of investments we need to be making, not just to keep our kids and communities safe, but I think to benefit the health and well-being of our communities, to actually reduce the rates of all kinds of violence or crime. There's a lot of solutions to be had in that regard. And so I agree with you, we need a whole of community approach, not necessarily just a singular approach. But there's a legitimate concern about keeping our kids safe, whether they're at school or anywhere else.
Matt,
Can I
go
go
ahead,
here
yep.
to some other folks?
And no, I was, again, you addressed some of it. Some people say it's not the guns, it's mental health. And mental health, I mean, the services are just not there. I mean, you have someone that goes to mental health and they say they want to put you in therapy, and therapy is once every month that they can get you in. And then, of course, if you have that schedule, then they're canceling for some reason. And again, it goes back to even the housing situation. If you don't have housing, how can people with mental health, you know, carry on? I mean, it's like a domino effect, you know, the whole system. It's like mental health, I mean, to me, it really doesn't even exist for our young people. It's like, and then we wonder why, you know, people are getting guns and shooting up things, and why people are going into a hospital because they're threatening to kill themselves, and then they're in there 2 days and let them back out. I just don't get it. It's like, and when you're a parent of a child that goes through stuff like this, it's like, it's very frustrating. And I don't care, I'm a Democrat, but I don't care if the Democrats don't do something. I'll vote for the party that's gonna do something. Like you said, it's not, yeah.
Thank you for sharing that perspective, and I think it's an important one. We were talking earlier about how can we attract investment into our district. I actually think it's by making investments in things like this. The things that are required, and I'll offer a commentary, some of you may have been involved in local economic development. A lot of times on a local level, we create some sort of tax incentive to attract an employer someplace, and then they come and they produce some jobs. But the moment that the economics don't work for them, they leave, and they leave a community devastated. How do we create resiliency in our communities? How do we make the kinds of investments that can create a space for our community families to thrive? It's about making investments in education, in healthcare, in human and social services like mental health resources or substance abuse. When you have all of these kinds of things that are required, actually required for a thriving community, not only are people going to stay here, they're going to come here. They're going to be attracted to being here. It's about talent. And when you start managing your talent better in that way, businesses will come. They'll want to access that talent. We already have all the natural resources we could ever want to have. We have a beautiful environment to live in. How do we create the actual human infrastructure that we need, the social infrastructure we need? It only comes through investment. And as I travel throughout much of our district, these investments have long gone neglected. We haven't had the kinds of investments in our communities that we need to create a space. I hear from parents and grandparents a lot about their kids and their grandkids moving away because they don't have economic opportunity here. They don't feel like they've got a chance or a future here. We need to create a space where people feel like they want to belong, to establish roots, and to create a future for everyone else. And the only way to do that is, I think, by making the kinds of investments we're now talking about.
What do you think about the bail issue in New York State?
Yeah. Now, the bail issue, with respect to bail reform, it is a state thing, so as an aspiring federal representative, I could take an easy way out and saying that's not my job. But I hear from folks, and I hear from folks all throughout our community, particularly those involved in our criminal justice system, our law enforcement, and even judges. And I think one of the challenges, what I hear from them, is that the bail reform that has been passed, and I know that there have been some adaptations to it, has removed the kind of judicial discretion that is required to keep our community safe. We're all hearing now these stories about people who were let out due to the new bail reform laws that only become repeat offenders of some sort of crime, or they have a more violent crime. And so this is something that I've drawn, it's been a disaster, at least in terms of actually providing the kinds of tools that our criminal justice system needs to keep our community safe. And so this is where I think actually having a strong voice representing much of upstate New York and the North Country that is a member of the Democratic Party, to talk to people like the governor, to say, you need to fix this. Because even if you think you fixed it, most of our criminal justice system thinks you haven't. And so it's incumbent upon you to make the fixes in the system and educate folks so that they have the tools to keep our community safe, because right now they don't feel like they do.
Matt, what's your position on the border, southern border situation?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we got a border czar who's never been to the border. We got a president who's never been to the border. We got a
Secretary of Homeland Security who swears the border is closed. And I'm just wondering what your position is. Obviously, there's fentanyl coming across that border from China, of all places, killing 300 people a day at the minimum.
Yeah.
That's recorded anyways.
Yeah.
What's your position as far as, do you believe the border's secure? Do you believe that we're doing everything we possibly can to keep our country safe?
Thank you for asking the question. And it may not come as a surprise that a former national security official takes our border security very seriously. Here's where I'll differ with some elements of the Democratic Party. I don't believe that our border is currently secure. But I also don't believe that politicians of either party are actually serious about addressing this problem. They haven't been for decades. A lot of times what we've seen and heard are these two concepts: border security, comprehensive immigration reform. And the leadership of both parties have used those as weapons to get reelected. They haven't actually used them as opportunities to solve a problem. And they're both problems that we need to solve. I don't trust Congresswoman Stefanik to have any kind of solution or interest in solving this problem. She's actually proven that time and time again, because during her 8 years in Congress, she actually voted against and prohibited during the Trump administration. She was in Congress for 4 years while Donald Trump was president, and she actually stood in the way of advancing, helping to build the border wall and oppose certain funding for that. So she goes whichever way the political wind blows, and there are far too many members of Congress that do that as well. And they take our national security, our question about secure borders, and use that as a political weapon. It shouldn't.
Can you show where she actually was against building the border wall?
Yep.
Because I've never seen that.
Correct. You can go back, and actually one of the reasons why she's been challenged as GOP conference chair, first when she tried to oust Liz Cheney, and even right now as she's applying for it next year, members, more conservative members within her own caucus, have called her out about some of her soft on border positions of the past. For me, I don't trust any politician in Washington right now to actually seriously address this challenge. And it needs to be addressed, because we've gone for too long. The fact that there are open questions about where is there open borders that people could walk across. I'm a counterterrorism professional. I care about terrorists trying to enter into this country. I care about the drugs that may be coming across. And it's not just across the land borders. Some of those are coming into our ports. We need to provide the resources necessary to secure our border. But because I don't trust any politician to come forward with an actual assessment for the American people that we can all trust, because politicians are going to say whatever they want, I want to take it out of their hands. I want to establish an independent bipartisan commission styled after the 9/11 Commission to study the true nature of the security of our border, identify the gaps, and to provide actual recommendations for closing those gaps. A study, an assessment, and recommendations that the American people across party lines can trust. And then ensure that members of Congress and whoever holds the executive branch put those into place. It's gone on for far too long. Both parties are to blame. And I'm going to, when I'm in Congress, fight like hell to secure the damn border. We also need to do that so that we can eventually move to comprehensive immigration reform. And guess what? People are starting to recognize, to include conservatives and libertarians, that we need comprehensive immigration reform to grow our economy. We don't have enough people in this country. We need to be able to grow our economy at the rates that we're used to. The only way you do that is through comprehensive immigration reform, but it has to happen sequentially.
It has to be legal.
It has to be legal, like my grandmother who came here from Sicily.
All of our families
Right.
do the same thing.
I went down to Ellis Island and I etched my grandmother's name on the wall there. We have a proud tradition, a nation of immigrants, and that's what we need to restore. The only way we can do that is by having clear, transparent, secure processes by which people can come to this nation. And that's what border security can offer us.
Exactly.
And so that's the kinds of stuff that we need to
Do you
do.
believe walls work?
In some instances, it might. There are some areas where it may not, and technology and actual manpower is more appropriate. But here's where I want some actual experts to offer unpolitical, unbiased input on what is actually necessary in certain areas. All right, that's my plug here for the final question, and then I'm going to stick around for any sort of one-on-one questions you'd like to ask that you didn't feel like you wanted in front of everybody.
I have seen the wall. I've also seen the Rio Grande River. My vision of a river is the St. Lawrence. I saw the Rio Grande, I'm like, Crystal Creek is bigger than that. So you're not going to stop people coming across with a wall. And I know there are drugs coming across there, but if they don't come across there, they'll come some other ways. We can't, I don't believe we can blame the people coming across for all this drug issue. And I also have to think, why are those people willing to make a who knows how long journey to get here? And you see the pictures of mothers putting their kids over the fence. I can't imagine me doing that. And it does say on the Statue of Liberty somewhere about bring us your poor, your whatever.
Unless you send us a
Whatever.
Mr. Castelli, may I ask a question? Can I finish this one? Oh, sorry. I thought he was done.
I'm done.
Well, no, I think you raised an important point. That people have always wanted to come to the United States of America because we are the greatest nation in the world. There's the same inspiration and desire that my grandparents had when they came from Italy as we see down on the southern border. Not a question of one policy versus another. It's a question of whether people want to come here for the very many reasons that our own ancestors came to this nation for. We also, to tie a question around climate change, the southern hemisphere is actually becoming, in certain places, very uninhabitable. And there's this concept of climate migration, where because there's adverse living conditions, people are going to be fleeing those things. Certainly in the southern hemisphere, but that's happening across the globe as well. So we need to address those challenges. But you raise an important point not to dehumanize people that want to come to this country who are seeking a better life. Because unless you're a Native American, almost everyone in our lineage did the exact same thing at some point in their history. And so that's the kind of proud tradition we need to embrace. We need to respect the dignity and humanity of all people and create humanitarian processes by which people can clearly come here so they're not risking life and limb to make a pass across a river. But we actually create some sort of clear security on our border and a process by which they can enter into. That's it, I think, for me right now. I'm grateful for the opportunity, and then we can do one-on-one stuff if that works for everybody else, okay? Great. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for sharing your perspective.
Appreciate you. No, you're good guys.
Thanks. I appreciate that.